Ukraine's air campaign will have increasingly severe effects on Russia's economy, but also on its ability to wage war in Ukraine. New attacks on oil tankers show how systematically Ukraine is targeting Russia's ability to wage war. Why this is just beginning and can really only get worse for Russia is explained in this video. Holy smokes! Now save the most at Holy with my code. Since the beginning of 2024, Ukraine has been attacking Russian oil infrastructure. At first, the whole thing had only limited success, partly because Russia naturally has reserves in storage and refining that have to be used up before any real effect can be felt. On the other hand, the attacks were not supported to a great extent by the US, because Biden wanted to avoid the higher gasoline prices that could have followed and was worried about them, especially before the US election. While Trump, after winning the election, put massive pressure on Zelensky to force him to make concessions to Russia. At the same time, he also increased the pressure on Russia regarding oil, on the one hand, by tightening sanctions, and on the other hand, by providing Ukraine with intelligence so that it could be more successful in its attacks on the oil infrastructure. Due to Ukraine's growing capabilities, since the beginning of 2026, at least 10 to 22 oil refineries in Russia have been hit, up to 2,500 kilometers away from the front. In addition to attacks on refineries, which have recently been very prominent, there have also been attacks on fuel and oil storage facilities, as well as on the export infrastructure itself. Now, a video has been released by the Ukrainians showing how 8 different tankers were hit by the Ukrainians, as they say, in the Sea of Azov. The Ukrainians say the tankers were on their way to deliver oil or fuel to Crimea. I'm not convinced of that, because if we look at the ships, we don't see any bow waves, we don't see any wake. They seem to be stationary tankers. But regardless of whether these tankers were actually on their way to Crimea, Russia's available tankers are of course limited, and every tanker that is taken out will no longer be able to bring fuel to Crimea in the future, or even just to the southern front, where the Russians are increasingly being cut off. So in addition to industry, Russia's transport capacity is also being targeted. Gasoline is getting scarce in Russia, so electric bicycles would be very practical there. At least for you, it's an option, especially at truly affordable prices with up to 75% off thanks to today's sponsor. Whether you want an e-bike to commute to work, or maybe because you enjoy mountain biking but don't really like riding uphill, it's definitely helpful if the thing has an electric motor. Now the problem is, the new ones are crazy expensive, especially the brand name bikes. And with used ones, you never really know what you're getting. Usually, you're buying a pig in a poke, and that's where today's sponsor Upway is different. Their technicians test the bike inside and out. They completely disassemble it and perform maintenance. 50 different points are checked. Everything is tested, from the brakes to the frame to the battery. The battery has to charge to 100% and still hold at least 80% of its capacity. Otherwise, it won't be sold. All of this means that brand name bikes are usually up to 65% cheaper. But now it's the summer sale. During this time, they're up to 75% cheaper. At the same time, if you have your own old bike, you can sell it to them. They'll pick it up for free and you'll get an extra €100 bonus. That means it's really a great offer. Now just order it through the link in the description. There's a 14-day money-back guarantee. That means if you try out the bike and you don't like it, you can send it back. There's a 1-year warranty, so even with the used ones, you're not taking any risk at all. And when it comes to bikes, there's really everything your heart desires. All sizes, all styles, from mountain bikes to road bikes, XS up to XL. From wild colors to deep black. Everything is included. Here's a really great offer now. Save up to 75% on brand name bikes. Just click the link in the description. Then you can save. Since around March, there has also been a campaign against Russian logistics. Of course, there were attacks before, but only in the past few months has Ukraine closed a medium-range capability gap. Close to the frontline HCFPV drones and bomber drones like the Vampire can attack targets just a few kilometers, about 20 or 30 kilometers behind the front lines, and they're relatively inexpensive. In the Russian hinterland, Ukraine has FP1, FP2 Lyuti, and other means of attack. But in between, they had nothing that was cheap enough. Was to use it against smaller targets as well, like a truck. And at the same time, it can fly far enough into the rear area. Because of course, FPV drones and Vampire or Baba Jager are cheap, but they just don't fly far enough. And there was a gap where Ukraine couldn't operate effectively, and that changed this year. In the meantime, Russian logistics toward Crimea is seriously threatened by the ongoing attacks from the Ukrainians, especially, of course, with the Hornet, and that is leading to growing problems. The attack now on Omsk, on the refinery there, almost 2,500 kilometers away from the front, shows how far the Ukrainians are now able to strike. 2,500 kilometers means that everything west of the Urals and even some areas beyond are now within reach of the Ukrainians. But Russia is already unable to protect high-value targets. Whether it's the oil facilities near Tuapse, which have been attacked repeatedly every few days, the Russians couldn't do anything about it. Or even the large refinery in Moscow, which was hit in full view of the Muscovites, despite what is probably the most intense air defense shield in the world surrounding the Russian capital. It's not just where the air defense is now that it's overwhelmed. Now much more needs to be protected because the Ukrainians can strike much farther, and that's effectively impossible to accomplish. In addition, Ukraine has been destroying more than one air defense system per day on average, also since the beginning of the year. So, more needs to be protected with less and less equipment, because realistically, the Russians are not able to produce replacements at the same rate as they are currently losing air defense systems. But it's actually going to get even worse. Basically, there is no reason to believe that Russia's situation will improve anytime soon. By normal standards, Ukraine should not have fewer strike assets in the future. But even more, systems such as the Hornet, now helping enforce the blockade of Crimea across the land bridge, have only recently been introduced. It can be expected that Ukraine will have more and more of these assets available as time goes on. New strike assets developed in the West for Ukraine are continually being added. For example, the US developed the ERAM specifically for Ukraine, a cruise missile that is inexpensive and easy for Ukraine to produce in large quantities. The US has already approved the sale of over 3,000 units. Each of these cruise missiles has a warhead of 100 kilograms and a range of 400 kilometers. The United Kingdom is also involved in developing weapons for Ukraine. With Project Breakstop, a cruise missile is being developed that has a warhead weight of 225 kilograms, a range of at least 500 kilometers, and a speed of at least 600 km/h. And all this at only £400,000 per unit, with the requirement that at least 20 of them can be produced per month. In addition, the British are also developing a ballistic missile with Project Nightfall. Here too, a 200-kilogram warhead, at least 500 kilometers range, and about £800,000 per unit with a minimum of 10 per month. At the same time, they would be much faster and much harder to intercept, since they are supposed to be ballistic missiles. In addition, Ukraine is actively working on improving its own drones, which can fly farther and are being supplemented by newer and more capable models. In addition, the FP-5 Flamingo, the Ukrainian cruise missile, is now apparently operational and is being used more and more frequently and successfully as well. And of course, the Flamingo's warhead, with its 1,000 kilograms, leaves a big impact on the target. If the 3,000-kilometer range mentioned by the Ukrainians is accurate, then the problem for the Russians increases once again. In addition, there are also Ukrainian ballistic missiles, also with a range beyond Moscow, which are expected to become operational in the coming months as well. The consequences for Russia are extremely unpleasant. The attacks on export infrastructure have hindered Russian oil exports. So even with higher world market prices due to the war involving Iran, Russia was not able to make more profit than before. The attacks on the refineries have also led to fuel shortages in almost all Russian oblasts. In more than half of them, rationing has even been introduced. There are also reports that civilians are no longer the only ones affected by fuel shortages, and that the military may also be facing local shortages and suffering as a result. At the same time, Russia has gone from being an exporter of fuels to an importer, which has wiped out the highly lucrative sales of gasoline and diesel, and is now forcing Russia to make expensive purchases. Currently, fuel is being purchased from Belarus, Kazakhstan, and India, but even that will probably not be able to cover the deficits, especially since there are also distribution problems. At the same time, maintenance is being shortened or postponed, and functioning refineries are being kept in operation as a result. So Russia is also avoiding shutting down functioning, operating refineries, even though this should actually be necessary, which in the medium term can of course lead to damage, and, if it lasts long enough, will also lead to damage, all without any Ukrainian attacks. In addition, refineries are now being allowed to produce lower quality fuel, which in the medium term can lead to engine damage. Also, to enable and maintain higher output. But again, at the expense of the future, more fuel is supposed to be available now. Basically, Russia will hardly be able to repair its refineries quickly enough for the foreseeable future to successfully counter further Ukrainian attacks. So, while revenues from oil and fuels are declining, at the same time, costs for repairs and purchases are rising, along with increasing inflation and weakened logistics. On the one hand, because vehicles in the hinterland are lining up at gas stations instead of transporting their cargo to its destination, whether that's goods or workers. On the other hand, because 200 to 250 kilometers behind the front, vehicles transporting personnel and materials for the armed forces are increasingly threatened by Ukrainian medium-range drones. So Russia's war has come home, and now every Russian citizen is confronted with it. At the moment, there's no sign that the situation will improve. On the contrary, it can be expected that things will keep getting worse. That's it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. That helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have anything to add. And if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. And don't forget to check out the link in the description if you want to get a brand name electric bike for up to 75% off. That's all from me. Thanks for your attention. See you soon. Thanks also to the supporters on Patreon as well as here on YouTube. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamuri, as well as Lieutenants Robert Fiel, Immelkopf, Floja Capri, Bietenmont, Lichtschatter NTX, Malermeister Nagel, Markus F., Alex Rosenthal, Mad Best, Mütter 1000 Janiscu, Cunningham, Austres, Finn, Fünffarb Flecktarn, Jans vom Eck, Uwe du Fresne, Nickname to 2bib, Carsten Schulz, Tequila 42. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.